Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Wunder Wisdom, Wunder Wisdom. And that's a name. That is my maiden name. And because it's my name, Scott, you are connected. Sorry, just told the whole world now, and you're stuck with it.
I think it's
So,
wonderful.
absolutely, it is. So Scott and I will be doing, we think, a monthly podcast called Wonder Wisdom. And we like to think that we have these great natural chats, conversations about all things spiritual and scientific. We also like to think that we walk that balance pretty well. And sometimes we even have great ideas. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, hearkening back to a conversation that you and I had a couple of weeks ago, which was kind of the impetus for doing this, was a conversation about how we both noticed something that was happening. And I said to you, you know, here's what I'm noticing. And, you know, the constant learning, reading, updating, watching other people, and listening to wisdom, knowledge, information that we do constantly just because we like to. Maybe we're nuts. I'd suggest there's a lot of that too. But um, I was noticing and thinking more about how the boundary, the frontier of my life was my skin. And that I'm being led to understand more fully and completely that who I am and everything about my life happens underneath my skin, and that everything outside of it was a projection from my eyes and all my sensory organs, and the projection of everything that I think and believe and hold true about life. And you agreed. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we say the word projection, we're coming up with a word or concept that we use to understand how we actually systematically make sense of the world through our senses and how
Yeah,
we
I like
actually
how you
create the
say that.
world.
Make sense of the world, because you're right, and I want you to continue down that line.
Sure.
But if our world doesn't make sense to us, we feel lost. So we like to have these conversations so that maybe people might glean a better sense of how to feel better and more staged in their life, especially with all the crazy shit that's going on, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So sensory organs, that's your bailiwick, your biomedical background. I keep saying that, but I mean, that's giving you a great understanding of the body and all the systems. But this
Yeah.
is mostly the updating constantly of knowledge and wisdom and information that you do. But let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I'd love to. And the reason that I'm so interested in it is because I'm fascinated about the connection between the kind of intangible experience that we have and the concepts that we come up with, like projection onto the world. And how does that actually relate to our physical system that we operate all the time that allows us to have the experience and allows us to come up with concepts? And so, remembering back to our conversation when you're saying the kind of the idea of skin deep and the skin as the boundary between the external and the internal world, when we're talking about sensory systems in our body, most people are familiar with the kind of the major ones, whether it's sight, taste, vision, or sight, taste, smell, things like that.
Yeah,
And
the standard
basically,
five senses,
the
right?
standard five senses. Yeah, you got it. And what I started to allude to was it's a little bit strange to kind of think of the concept, but we don't necessarily interact with the external world, like way outside of us. That only happens literally at our boundaries in our sensory systems.
Right.
So when we're talking about seeing that tree that's 30 feet in front of me, I actually don't necessarily see the 30 feet in front of me. I only actually interact with it when that light hits my eye. So there really is only the boundary of my eye, and I'm deciphering the entire world at the boundary of my eyeball.
Right.
You think about when you touch something, it's the boundary of your skin. You really don't feel something until it actually touches your body. It's the same thing with sound. So when you're hearing something, let's say you think you're hearing something 30 feet away, you're actually only hearing it when it gets to your ear.
Right.
Now, what becomes really interesting is what happens is you take in all that information and you only really interact with it when it touches your meat suit, when it touches all of your boundaries, your
Right.
eyeballs, your ears, your skin. And then what you do is you make sense of all the information. You kind of take in it all and then you have to make meaning of it. What does it mean? So that you can act on it. It's kind of like this wheel that goes, information comes in, it hits the boundaries of your body, the main ones, your eyes, your skin, your gut, your lungs, your ears. And essentially at that point, you then create the world inside your body.
Well, you create the
Because you,
story, right, of what you're seeing.
exactly, you create the story, and it's a story that you understand. It's a story that
Makes sense to you.
makes sense to you, that you've built over time. And it's one that has to make sense to you because you have to act on the information. And you can't just be confused 24/7. You have to find a way to make meaning of it. Well, yeah, times you definitely can get confused, but it would probably be a good idea that most of the time you can make sense of it when it is in your body so that you can act on it in a coherent way. So that
Right.
you can take in information, understand it, and then act on it. But this kind of last point, what you hear a lot is people throwing around the idea of this being a simulation that we're in. That's kind of this cool new idea topic. And it's even popular enough that you can hear someone like Elon Musk reference it in podcasts.
Like the Matrix, right?
Like the Matrix, exactly. And it's definitely, that's a whole other topic, but it becomes really interesting when you understand that nothing technically exists outside of your body because you don't interact with it outside of your body. The entire world literally only comes to fruition when it hits your senses, because that's when you start interacting with it. And so when we're talking about a simulation, what we're what you can kind of relate it back to is all the information comes into your senses literally at the boundary of your body.
Right.
And then you internalize it, make meaning of it, and then act on what world you construct inside your own physical meat suit.
Right.
So yeah, it is really a projection that we act on, that we put onto the world. Now it's a little bit objective because we have to agree on the external world that we act in, but it's also subjective because we have to personally relate to all the information that we're intaking.
Right. And that reminds me of a story that Dr. Bruce Lipton just sent around in his monthly newsletter, which I get and read with interest every month. And I've posted many of his articles. Love that guy, cell biologist. His wisdom is just credible and real for me. And he was talking about this, the biology of belief. So this is the connection between the body and what we think. And he told the story, in his words, of Mutt and Jeff. And he said Mutt and Jeff have been lifelong friends, have lived side by side, and in their 20 somethings. And as they were walking one day, a snake crossed their path. They both experienced the same snake at the same time, in the same external stimuli, the same circumstances. Mutt, whose mother was a biologist and who had introduced him to snakes many years ago, and the beauty and the glory of snakes, and what a wonderful creature snakes were, and how cool they were, and how they slithered along the ground and felt all the vibrations of the earth. And so he had a fully developed appreciation for snakes. He was in a wondrous state seeing the snake, whereas Jeff freaked out, screamed, and ran away because that was his mother's reaction one day when the snake crossed from Mutt's backyard to Jeff's backyard. The mother screamed, got terrified, grabbed Jeff and ran in the house, and then told her son that snakes were dangerous and horrible and to stay away and to be scared. So, and so the story went on further that, Mutt was in a very calm and peaceful, wondrous state, and his body came alive when he saw the snake. And he went into a completely disordered, chaotic, frightened fight or flight state. And thank goodness he was young, because he could well have had a heart attack if his heart was not in such good shape. So this is really important, because this addresses why so many people can have different responses to the same stimuli, the same experience, the same circumstances. And, more to the point, in this world pandemic, why are people having a whole range of different experiences? Right?
Yeah, Yeah, I absolutely love that story because it simplifies such a grand and meaningful and helpful topic to really ingrain and understand. And maybe a helpful way to break it up is there's kind of the objective world. They both saw a snake, but
Right,
then it's again how they relate to that objective world. And how they relate to what you interact with.
right,
And let's say to give the devil its due, when someone, let's say, because they were trained that snakes are incredibly dangerous, maybe in their past, in their parents' past, in their ancestors' past, snakes were incredibly dangerous. Maybe they had attacked their family in the past. And so maybe there is a little bit of helpfulness and perhaps understanding, okay, I'm having this reaction, but why? And you can say, well, my parents just, told me that it was snakes are incredibly dangerous. It might be helpful to realize that that might have been helpful for them and that might have been true for them. And
right.
that interaction that you're having with the snake and that feeling that you're having towards it, that might have actually served, I believe it's Mutt who's struggling.
Nope,
That
Jeff.
might have Jeff, that might have served Jeff's parents. And so, on one hand, that reaction that you're having towards a snake, that's actually just the way that you were trained to interact with the world because it was helpful. And so, I think when we're relating to the world, it helps to not only understand how we're feeling, but why, the really why we're feeling that way. And then from there, we can then make the choice to, is this reaction that I'm having to the world, subconscious or not? Is it helpful? How has it served me or others in the past? And going forward, is it something that I want to carry with me forward? Because, stress or not stress, we can always choose the new moment going forward. I think that's the beautiful aspect of humanity is our ability to choose. And so if you are having a reaction to something, honor the fact that perhaps it might have actually been a safety mechanism in the past. It might have actually been helpful, but is this something that I want to carry forward? Is this relationship to that thing in the external world something that's going to help me in the future? Maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah, that's really good, Scott. You always make these great points. And two things I want to
Thank
comment
you.
on. And number one is judgment. We don't have to be in judgment about anything, about our reactions, anyone else's reactions, and to conjure or create a state of compassion and understanding and acceptance that people are in a place where they are because they're in a place where they are. There's good reasons for all of us to have feelings and opinions and perspectives and desires because we've come by them honestly. We've come by them with our experience in life, by the people around us. We've been shaped by external conditions, media, the friends we've chosen, education, religion, like all of those things. There's a myriad of things that shape who we are and how we think. And it's all good. And no one's way is better than anyone else, that people are choosing to do the best they can with what they have in the moment.
Yeah.
And the second part was, again, the choice point. We all, now that we know, now that we're aware that, maybe this beneath my skin, who I am, is something I can work with and to just work on myself. It's the only thing that we'll ever control is ourselves. We'll never control the external world. Well, didn't we learn that this year?
Mhm.
That we have no control over what happens in our outer world. I mean, a world pandemic, first of all, who saw that coming? But second, what were we going to do about it except to do our best to cope? Um, but we have an opportunity to influence and not control. And
Yes.
so again, our influence is shaped with the choice. The choice is because we have a myriad of choice points a day to act in a certain way towards people, towards things, experiences, conditions, everything in our life. And that is
Yeah.
what shapes us, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's to kind of tie together some of the, let's say, experiential and the scientific in a very simple way. When we're talking about, let's say, sensory systems and we're
Mm-hmm.
taking in information, which then we use to act on, there's kind of a middle ground there. And I think that is very much to do with how we make meaning and how we relate to it. So
Yes.
as we've taken in that information, if we can somehow put ourselves in a state of kindness, appreciation, gratitude, peace, acceptance, there's a lot of words that we use, but
Openness, right? Big one.
openness, exactly, not like non-judgment, no resistance.
Right.
Everyone can kind of find their own word and what works for them.
Right.
But in that state, we can really interact with the world in such a way that is not going to perpetuate any further systems which are deleterious to human beings. In that state of being open, in that state of being kind, it's understanding that we don't understand the entire world in its entirety. We don't really understand human beings in their entirety because it's too complicated. And so we have a choice perhaps in every moment where when we are kind of gathering the information, what people are doing, what the external world is doing, what's going on, like you said, I think it is freeing to understand that you really don't control the external world. And the fact that we can't means we don't really have to worry about that. But when we're understanding we can really only control our reaction to it in sort of
Exactly.
like a dance fashion, it then becomes a little bit simpler because we can simply choose to look and act upon the world in kindness, gratitude, openness, non-judgment, again, whatever word works for you. And I think that's where we find a lot of the flow, is that we don't have to really control everything. We just kind of have to be that conduit for kindness. So as information comes in, information passes out, there is a little bit of flow and resonance, with these higher states of, call it consciousness, call it being, whatever it is.
Right.
And then I really think other people are drawn to that when they're in your presence, when they're seeing that, because it feels so good. It's such a good natural state. Who doesn't want to feel good at the end of the day? Judging people, hating people, that's a tough, energetic, draining way to live. So when you are really in that kind of higher resonance of being, information coming in, information going out, and it's just a nice, kind flow, non-judgment allowing, I think it really sets a good standard that other beings can then resonate with. And then all of a sudden you realize, after all, you didn't have to control the external world. All you had to do is be, quote unquote, your best self. Other people start vibrating with their best selves, and all of a sudden there's this quote unquote change reaction that happens.
I love that. And I want to get into that more in a second, so remind me. But
Okay.
just to go back to maybe help people understand a little bit, that when we understand, I think anyway, when we understand ourselves and where we ourselves have come from, I think we develop a little more compassion for others. And it's easier to see without judgment that other people are so different because I'm different. So the reason I say
Yeah.
that is there's some really good information out there about subconscious programming. There's lots of it. And just understanding that even in utero, before we're even babies in the world, we are absorbing energy from our moms, anyone in her environment, through the energy of her predominant cascades of emotion and thought, but also her stress hormone cortisol crosses the placental barrier. And then from age 0 to 2, essentially when we're babies, sleeping a lot, we do spend a lot of time in delta. That's the slowest brain wave. That when you're asleep, you're by no means not taking in information from your environment. And so babies are taking in all kinds of information in their environment. And from 2 to 6, that brain wave develops a little faster into a theta, which is, again, a very highly suggestible hypnotic brain state. And here's the issue, and that is that children at that age, and in fact, for many of us, not till we're in our mid-20s, do we have the full capability of our frontal lobe to discern and decide that information is true for us or not. So these kids are taking in everything in their environment, and all of the messages from mom and dad, whatever, the TV, whatever media we are exposing our children to, clergy, coaches, whatever. We're all taking in that information without any boundaries or filters. And so, and here, so, you've heard, everyone's heard the saying, give me a 7-year-old and I'll give you the man. So fully subconscious programming is formed when we are young children. And this informs our ideas about right and wrong, good or bad, true and false. And we have to understand we weren't born that way. We were that tabula rasa, that blank slate. And we took on our families, our neighborhoods, our societies, our cultural, religious, whatever understandings about what was true in life. And so that shapes what we believe. That's not necessarily the same for anybody else. regardless whether you're in the same country or live in a different home. So, and plus genetics plays a part, your choice about what you're going to do in life when you get here, that kind of thing. So when we understand that this world is a really cool place of lots of really cool differences. And imagine if we were all homogeneous. I mean, that would just be boring if we were all the same. That would be like the Stepford wife kind of nightmare scenario. And so when we can appreciate, oh, I have this pattern in me because we all, again, the only thing we can control and understand truly is ourselves. We will never look out of anyone else's eyes. And that's an important thing to think about. So we have to look at ourselves and go, oh, that's where I learned that. And realize if I learned it, I can unlearn it and learn something else, right? It's that think again idea. And it's not that book I just read, Think Again, and I can't remember the author, but it was an awesome book. And it said, we confuse intelligence with the ability to learn and think, but intelligence is actually the ability to think again and unlearn, because we come programmed, which is the basis. These programs, these set programs are the basis for all the isms, the sexism, the racism, all of that, those fixed ideas that we have about other people, especially different people that we don't really understand. So, this breaks down so many barriers when we see, this is how I was made. But again, I can make a different choice when I notice that I have the opportunity to do that. That was a long run, but anyway, thanks.
Yeah. A very good one. A very, very good one. And so ripe for discussion because first and foremost, I think it starts with awareness. You simply have to be aware when these patterns are coming up. And it takes a little bit of commitment to yourself to understand that it's going to be okay. When I react, when I get triggered by things, I don't need to freak out. I just simply need to be aware so that later you can kind of start to pattern match. Oh, every time I see my mom, just first thing, for example, I freak out and I start to get a little angry and edgy.
Hey.
And then it happens again. And then it happens again. Of course, not me most of the time. No, just kidding. Of course. But you can kind of start to pattern match after a while and go, oh, clearly there's something in me. And a lot of the times it's so deep. And
DNA deep.
Literally DNA deep. And when you think about, on a side note, what DNA it is it's a physical library that's storing all the experiences of your ancestors. Because in some way, you got to think that when you interact with the world and an experience, like you're literally storing that in your body so that the future generations can learn from that. All the people that have ever added to your DNA, like you're the kind of product of all the experiences of all those people. So we're always storing the experiences, and it can literally be so deep with your ancestors, with your parents. So when you get that triggered, or when you're feeling off about something, it could be for a very good reason, and it could be, like you said, genetics deep. However, it is really nice to know that we can change. And there's a couple of just ideas I want to throw out with this that came to mind as you were talking.
Yeah.
The idea from Harry Potter #2, and if anyone's seen it in the Chamber of Secrets, believe it's Harry. He finds himself, in the under the Hogwarts castle, and down there's a snake, and it's kind of metaphorical of chaos. And then, if I'm not mistaken, what he's saved by is the phoenix, which comes and saves him. And the old mythological idea, as far as I understand it, of the phoenix is it's that thing which it can die and then be reborn, die and reborn.
Rising from the ashes, literally
rising from the ashes. And it's like every time that you learn something, it's actually kind of an unlearning first and then a learning. And that's why I think change can be so uncomfortable. And there's a really interesting idea from, I believe it's Carl Jung, a psychologist in the 20th century. And his idea of the self, when he was talking about the self, when we use that term, it's a little strange because we're always changing from a molecular cellular aspect. Right. Literally every millionth of a second, there's a million things that happen in a cell every second. So you're always changing at a crazy pace. And even psychologically, when you're learning something, you have to unlearn, that's got to die off, and then you got to learn again. So you're always going through this death and rebirth phase, death and rebirth. So Carl Jung, he thought of the idea of the self as that which is stable through transformations. Because if you're always changing and you're always dying, being reborn, old ideas gone, new ideas. The self is a kind of stabilized thing throughout those changes. And I think for me, that's been really helpful, and it may be helpful for other people because you don't start identifying with necessarily who you are right now. You kind of identify with the person, the thing, the consciousness that can change, that can learn, that can be aware. And I think that in itself could be its own huge conversation. But just knowing that it's okay to simply be aware and notice when you are triggered, and it's okay to be able to change and to understand that you aren't perfect, I think that is also very freeing in life. I don't have to be perfect now because I can always be better tomorrow. And I
Yes.
think it's really grounded in the human superpower of choice. If we can choose a new future, then we really don't have to worry about who we are right now because there's always a new choice available for the future. And it's so cool that that idea, I mean, we're still learning it today, but that's been encoded in mythology and ideas for as
Yeah.
long as time goes. You know, if you want a new idea, read an old book. You know, self-transformation. It's the same thing people are working on since the dawn of human beings because it's so ingrained in who we are as human beings.
Yeah, you and I have had a lot of conversations about, and we're talking old 6,000 years old esoteric information, which we're
Yeah.
starting to learn is the true basis of life. We've gotten so far away from that wisdom and knowledge.
One of the coolest things that I'm finding over and over and over in studying biology, neuroscience, anything like the hard science when it comes to the physical body,
Right,
what we seem to be learning when we kind of generalize and actually understand information, it's the same story people were telling thousands of years ago.
right,
They didn't have the fancy neuroscience terms to name it then, and it, with all due respect, is probably a little bit irrelevant. So, for example, when someone like Jesus is talking about forgiveness,
right.
I don't know, and I really don't believe that you can separate that from a neuroscience or a biology standpoint. And the reason that I say that is when you're talking about forgiveness, just in a very simple way for people to think, when you forgive someone, how does that actually feel? And like, how do you know when you've really forgiven someone? It
Right.
doesn't just stay up here. It's like a, what's the term used? It was a weight lifted off my chest. You know, I feel I'm not angry at that person anymore. So you've
No longer
neurologically
carrying the pain. It's
no
the
longer carrying
pain
the pain.
of
Yeah,
that, whatever, that bad feeling.
exactly. You've literally neurologically like rewrote the program around that person or that thing. Like you've re-hardwired your nervous system. As far as I understand, Jesus wasn't a neuroscientist because neuroscience wasn't around back in the day.
Well, we don't
So
know. We don't know. But
potentially he was running a laboratory and the whole thing's a big ruse. You never know. But I'm going to hedge my bets and say probably not. But nonetheless, he wouldn't have had to back then because to communicate the idea of like neurologically rewiring and like hardwiring your system,
yes,
he could just kind of code it in a concept of forgiveness. And that was simple enough. And that's really the conceptually all we need to understand the deep neuroscience that goes behind kind of rewiring your brain. Forgive and let your kind of own neuroscience do what it does.
right. And the bottom line is at the end of the day, how do we feel? The
Yeah.
proof is in the pudding with our bodies, with how we feel. How do our thoughts feel to us? How do our feelings feel to us? This has become the watcher of your thoughts. How are your words now coming out? How are your actions? How is your life going along? What are you seeing? So again, let's take it back to, excuse me, what we see in our environment, the quality of what we see. Are there good things? What's the nature of our reality? It's what we create with what's inside, what we create inside. So there's an interesting video, and I think I showed it to you years ago that HeartMath puts out, and it's called The Soundtrack of Your Life. And it's about seeing through the eyes of somebody sitting in a cab going through central New York City, along the bridge, the buildings, the squares, all of that. And it's interesting. I think I can explain it enough to say that half the video, it's a long, very discordant, screeching violin music. And then the second half is to a beautiful orchestral piece that is melodic and very comforting. People will swear that it's a different video, the second half, but it's not. You're seeing exactly the same images. But HeartMath asks, what is the soundtrack of your life? Because it colors your vision of what you are looking at. So what are you literally projecting out of the projectors known as your eyes, with your mind behind it, how you feel, all your subconscious programming, what are you seeing? So it's, that's a big topic, but it's, what do you expect to see in your environment? So many things color that. So what's the soundtrack of your life? How do you feel? Do you feel good about your life? Who was it? I think it was Dr. Wayne Dyer was quoting actually Albert Einstein, I think, and it was, do you believe in a friendly or a hostile universe? I mean, basic questions like that, you really got to be ruthless.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's a guy, Jamie Wheal, who I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of, founder or co-founder of the Flow Genome Project.
Right.
And I once heard him say, and I looked it up, and it's true, in our what we conceptualize as the information theory. It's the idea of conscious versus subconscious programming, or sorry, conscious versus subconscious information processing. Consciously, like the us that likes coffee and is looking at this right now, consciously we can perceive and deal with about 15 to 60 bits of information. Subconsciously, at the exact same time, we're dealing and processing with like millions and millions and millions and potentially even more bits of information. So on one hand, there's us, which is the kind of cute small self, which deals with an unbelievable small amount of information at a time, when there's the rest of us that deals with literally everything else going on. And I think the best way for people to understand this is, it's called the cocktail party effect. And it's a famous kind of story taught in psychology classes, but imagine you're in a room in a cocktail party and it's loud, and you're having a conversation with someone, and then you hear your name in the kind of back corner. If I'm going to say Chris, and you kind of turn, and perhaps people have had that. Well, what is that really telling you? You were having the conversation and maybe focused, but there was another larger part of you which was taking in all of the sound around you, and it was deciphering it. Is this important or not? Is this important or not? And then when you heard your name, that's when you decided, oh, that's something important. That's something I need to attend to. So you're really attending to all of the information. So on that exact point, if we're taking in millions and millions and millions of pieces of information at any one point in life, yet we're only responding to a certain super small amount of that information, well, how do we select what to pay attention to? And psychologists don't know. It's called the attention problem right now. I've had conversations with people that study that. No one really understands exactly why we pay attention to different things at one time, and people have different ideas. I think you and I might postulate what is perhaps meaningful to us, what state of being are we in at that one time. For example, if you set your state of being to be a loving state of being, well, naturally that seems to be the filter, which then is scanning all of your information and going, I could potentially pay attention to this and find love. I could pay attention to this and find love. And so our reality is no longer just the objective reality, but it's simply what are we paying attention to based on perhaps intention, meaning, things like that.
What's important to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, another way to describe that, you did a beautiful job of that, is to think about, and I think I learned this from your sister. She talked about a reticular activating system. And it helps create the filter or the lens, which models our subconscious programming. So it could be like the blinkers on the horse, right? So everything that matches with what we think is good, bad, true or false, right or wrong, can make it in the funnel, and the rest gets bounced. Right? That's if you're operating unconsciously. And so this is the effective conditioning, is this is how I'm seeing my world. This is what I'm expecting to show up. And so helpful to really go, oh, wow. And the way to break that down is, like you said earlier, is to notice patterns. Why does this type of person keep showing up in my life? Why do I keep having failures? Because it's all the stuff that makes us feel lousy that we're going to question. The stuff that makes us feel good is like, right on, man, bring more of that. But when we don't feel good about things, we have to look at, okay, who's the spoke of the wheel? Who's the common denominator here? Oh, it's me. What am I doing, thinking, feeling, saying that is summoning this lesson in my life to show me that this is a pattern that I've got that maybe I want to rethink? because at the end of the day, remember we said we don't control anybody else. The only person we
Yeah.
control is ourselves. So what do I need to change about me that will stop that particular pattern from showing up? I remember James Arthur Ray was once talking and he said, people go like, why me? And he says, because it is you. And I laughed so hard. So I'm saying it,
Yeah.
why me? Because it is you. So it's that, it is
Totally.
all about me. And to be selfish is to really examine the self. How can I make my life better? How can I show up better? What can I change about me and my thought processes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a simple idea that people have perpetuated. Take responsibility of your own life. And sometimes if you're a human being, that can be extremely tough because you go, well,
If you
this
are.
person sucks, they're just the worst. And then this person sucks. And I think it's not about whether that's true or not. It's not about whether they are quote unquote actually rude or whatnot. But is there a way that you can take responsibility, that you can engage with them where their state of being or who they are is almost irrelevant? If you can kind of maintain your own coherence, maintain your own state of being, of peace, of stability, whatever it is. And I know that I've found in my own life when I don't make interactions about other people, well, this person makes me feel this way, so that therefore they're like this. Well, this person makes me feel this way, so they're like this.
Right.
If I can just kind of approach a more solid state of being myself, people, I think it's just there's a greater chance that they'll resonate with kind of that state of being. And then you can almost draw out, that kindness, that peace, that stability, or even if it's just a more neutral state of being from them. So if you're thinking like, oh, my boss sucks, you know what? Give the devil its due.
But guess what?
95% of
Your
them,
boss is going to suck. You think your
yeah,
boss sucks, your boss is going to suck. Every day, if you have that expectation, that's
yeah.
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, and how can it not? If you're going, my boss sucks, just think about, you don't have to say it out loud. Everyone knows the idea of body language. And I just want to reference the movie because I just watched it recently, Hitch.
Yeah.
When Hitch is teaching his client, I forget.
Oh, Kevin.
Yeah, yeah, Kevin James, and
Yeah.
he's saying, you're like an iceberg. Like most of you is underneath the waters. It's the idea of body language. If you're going into the office thinking my boss sucks, my boss sucks, all it takes is for you to look at your boss and like literally, what are you showing your boss? You suck. So then, what is your boss going to think? Well, that person is, they're sending me
Thinks I
shade. They're
suck,
sending
so
me
you
hate.
suck.
Yeah, and you find that resonance. But imagine if that one day, even if your boss is like 95% terrible, maybe they're just 1%, maybe the neutral good, whatever. If you can bring that state of being, which is a little more neutral, compassionate, accepting, what part do you think you're more likely to draw out of that person? And so I think that's where that self-fulfilling prophecy is we tend to find a resonance with people. And so if you are bringing that idea that you suck, well, then people are going to kind of meet you halfway and there's almost no room for anything else. But if you are able to bring that kind of better state of being, there's at least the opportunity for that person to grab it. And better yet, if you bring, let's say, a stable state of being and then the other person doesn't match you, well, that's not your job anyway. You've done the best you can and you don't freak out. And I've just noticed that in my life. It's not creating expectations. I'm going to be stable because then they're going to be happy. That's an expectation which can get dangerous because if they don't fulfill that, then you lose your own stability and it doesn't really work. But if you come as I don't need them to do anything, the idea of being unconditional, then you open up the opportunity for resonance where you can both find perhaps neutral, even good ground. And even if they're not kind of doing their part in that, well, that's no big deal. You've done your best and that's not your work anyway. So it's almost an
Right.
easier way to live.
And now your choice is to exit stage left. I don't have to deal with this anymore. I've done my best. I've been as loving and kind and understanding and patient, not tolerant, accepting, not tolerant. I don't like that word.
Right.
So I heard a saying this week again, and it was to be in the world, but
Out of
not
the
of it.
world. Yeah, that was
And
Jesus, I'm not mistaken.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke to him last week and it was a good conversation. I think I'm gonna,
Say hello next time for me,
yeah,
please.
absolutely. And have him on my
Yeah.
podcast.
Right on.
Actually, yeah, he's so, anyway.
He's busy doing neuroscience, actually, as we've already discussed.
Yeah, he's realized now
Yeah.
that he's got to study up and brush up because he's got big shoes to fill.
No kidding. Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be in the world and not of it, it's that idea of, again, how are you seeing it and expectations of what is showing up for you. So, I think we're coming towards the end of our time here today. So I think it would be really cool to continue talking about, first of all, what steps we could take to help calm our nervous system. And you've got some really good stuff about polyvagal theory and self-soothing and heart math, about how to interrupt that brain autonomic nervous system heart negative feedback loop, and how we can breathe and become mindful and meditate. And so we've got some good ground to cover, possibly for next month. But maybe the way to close this conversation is a couple things. Become aware.
Yeah.
Become aware. Do some and look at yourself in the third person. I read that once. Someone said, talk about yourself, think about yourself as, look what she's doing now. Look at what the body wants now. Look at what's happening for her now. And it really grounds the idea that there is an us, there is that consciousness that is there, the watcher of the thoughts. Who is that? Who is, what is, or who is inhabiting the body? What is the brain working for? What is the heart working for? What is that consciousness operating the meat suit? And I think you form, when you don't take for granted your thoughts and your feelings, because people say, well, I can't help what I feel. Well, you better, or you're going to be subject to that programming for the whole rest of your life, and you'll never figure out why this stuff doesn't make sense to you. But so and when you ask your body, hey body, like it's your pet, what do you need? What do you need today? What am I not listening to? Which is something I'm working on myself. It's just, it changes the whole flavor of the relationship with yourself. I don't know. Was that weird?
Well, it is weird. It's such a strange, just the phrase, what's your relationship like with yourself? That is such a strange thing to actually comprehend, the idea that we can have a relationship with ourselves.
I guess it's very different for some people. Yeah.
Of course, but like, we can take care of ourselves. Like, the idea of taking care, that means there's almost kind of to you, because like the person taking care of like the other person, it's naturally just a strange idea. But it's part like you like watch yourself. I've heard, Jordan Peterson, the famous psychologist, he tells his clients, just watch yourself for the next 2 weeks. Don't kind of do anything. Just literally watch yourself.
That comes from Eckhart Tolle, actually, years ago.
Okay.
The Power of Now, and that it becoming the watcher of your thoughts is, yes, watch yourself for 2 weeks, and what you're thinking and what happens and when you're triggered, what just happened.
Yeah, that's
ruthless self-examination.
Yeah, exactly. And
watch what you say, your words. Sorry, I did this years ago, 100 years ago, because and for 2 weeks, and I always thought I was a pretty positive person, just on that note, and I was horrified at what I was saying and what I was thinking. I was like,
I think it's easy to say but tough in practice, because if you're kind of new to that idea of watching yourself, it might be a little bit surprising. You kind of have these preconceived notions of who I am, but you have to really be honest when you watch yourself to really allow the you that is to come forward. And that can be a little bit tough, but it's the necessary first step.
it is. And to be not judgmental, be easy on yourself, love yourself, and laugh. Oh, there I am doing that again.
I'm just going to say, it's not always a laughing matter, because it actually might kind of terrify you about who you are. And I just want to say that because sometimes I've heard the term spiritual bypass, and it's like, if you just kind of quickly laugh, it's a too fake, and then it's not necessarily helpful. If that is a little bit, just to kind of release that a little bit of like, holy smokes, that weird thing came out and I didn't know that was in me. If that helps, for sure. Yeah. But there might be other times where it might not quite be a laughing matter. It's like, oh, that was kind of stored in me and I didn't know where that came from.
Right.
But now I know. So it's, if it's a self-soothing thing, for sure, but definitely the first part is awareness. Now, so let's say if I've paid attention to myself for a couple of weeks, maybe even I've journaled sometimes, I've gotten triggered and starting to see a pattern. What do you recommend that I do next after that?
Well, how I work with my clients is to say, okay, well, that's caused by something inside of you, your thoughts about this, your experiences. Trauma informs much of what we see. Trauma from any on a continuum from great trauma to even little trauma. It informs the lens through which we see life, how we see ourselves. And so it's understanding that there's lots of stuff that we've pushed down and we've repressed, and it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it's in the body. As we take these etheric ideas, these thoughts, and we ground them slowly into our body, this is, in my view, this is the advent of disease, dis-ease, as the energy becomes more dense and slow, which is what our body is. It's the last bastion of everything, which is again another talk for you and I to consider doing. But so to understand that somehow we have to really, that has to come up. So it's the issue of being quiet and learning to calm our nervous system so that this stuff can come back up. And it's painful as it goes. We don't necessarily have to experience all of it, but we're going to feel it as it's going. And so that's why change is hard. It's painful, because a lot of that trauma is going to be regurgitated in order for it to leave the body. But again, a necessary process. Is that what you were kind of asking me, what I thought about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. In terms of, helpful tips. One of the things that for me that's been really helpful is understanding not to necessarily really try and control and change your thoughts around something, because to me, that's a little bit, you're kind of in the weeds and in a little bit of a chaotic space there. As you talk about the etheric self grounded in the body, perhaps another way to say that is when you have thoughts, you have emotional or physical reactions to them.
Right.
And so that idea of like our thoughts literally influence our body, because even though the thought might seem a little bit up here, we have that physical, we can actually feel our body's reaction to it.
Right.
So they are totally linked. For me, I find it really easy, especially if I'm struggling with something, to start very general. And if I'm being triggered by something, it's like, don't try and change that. Just try and get to a neutral state about it. Don't try and go from I'm really pissed off, I'm anxious about it, to, oh, I'm feeling fantastic. Like that's too big of a gap.
Yeah.
But simply trying to just kind of lessen the pain in some sense, just lessen, kind of get to that neutral state, and then perhaps some fresh eyes, you can move forward. So it is something as simple as exhaling and breathing, meditating, whatever it is, getting yourself still and quiet, and you almost kind of quiet the body a little bit. And from that more neutral place, I think it's a lot easier to kind of re-hardwire and make changes from that kind of stable neutral state.
Yeah, no, I love that. That is, and then there's the sound breath, using breath and chanting, or the huh, to metabolize this. Is that Joe Dispenza? No, who is that talks about the ability to
There's
do that? I think there's
there
probably a number of people that talk about that.
Yeah. There's a wonderful book called The Molecules of Emotions,
Yes,
written
Candace
by
Pert.
a lady, Candace Pert, exactly. And pretty simple. Was a pretty gangster neuroscientist back in the past few decades,
I
but
think she's from the 80s, isn't she? And she was
yeah,
literally laughed at by the scientific cohort.
yeah. Well, it's so strange that if you go back, this is a little bit off topic, but just quickly, if you go back 40 years, the idea of talking about somehow how the emotions related to the body, that was like woo-woo nonsense, which I truly cannot wrap my head around, because we feel emotions. We literally feel them in the body. So how could they not be tied to the body? Now, where that becomes helpful is kind of understanding that, when we're getting these triggers, they are kind of in the body. It can literally be as simple as just getting oxygen into the body, like truly, and even from a very scientific level, reoxygenating and breathing properly. It seems to it allows the natural processes that you have in you, that kind of death, rebirth, where you need to give your cells in your physical body like the energy to do that. And it's so cool because you almost don't have to necessarily do all the work yourself. You simply have to create the environment which allows the healing to take place.
Right.
And it's a much more
Right.
simple way, I think, to kind of tackle the problem. Not like I need to fix my problems. It's I need to curate the space where my problems can naturally be fixed. And so literally things as simple as getting quiet, sitting down, inhaling for 5 to 6 seconds, exhaling to 5 to 6 seconds. If you have really relaxing music, or even type in meditation music on YouTube, spend 10 minutes when you're feeling off, inhaling 5 to 6 seconds, exhaling 5 to 6 seconds. You're creating this relaxing, safe space where you're literally just letting your kind of greater self intelligence almost take over and kind of do the work for you. And you come out and you kind of wake up after that, and you're almost in a new state with new, fresh eyes. And then the next time, perhaps, that you interact with that thing which is throwing you off, you might not have that natural reaction.
Yeah.
It's lessened, it's a little bit better, and you kind of notice that and you go, ooh, this is working. And then you start the cycle.
I love what you said,
Yeah.
curate the space. That is, wow, that just struck me very, very powerful. Something
Cool.
that I learned from Dr. Hugh Len, the Ho'oponopono expert. Um, it's a box breathing. And this has worked for me for the last several months since I've learned it. And that is
Yeah.
so box breathing is to breathe in. So imagine a box, hold for equal amount of time. So you've come across the top, exhale, come down the side of the box, and then hold the non breath back to the beginning. And what he says is do 10 tens. So 1, 2, 3. Now he says count quickly or don't pass out. I mean, that's never good. But 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 times. And I feel magnificent when I finish, very calm.
If I may, if I'm not mistaken, box breathing was actually invented by a Navy SEAL or a commander in the Navy SEALs.
I think you're right.
And that there's a guy, Ben Greenfield, who did some training with the Navy SEALs and found that out of all their practices, that is the one thing that they like most rely on in their times of combat. And the reason that the box breathing was invented was because if you imagine you're like, if you're in a danger zone and you have bullets flying at you, you need something which works extremely well right away, that is easy to do. So it's so interesting and cool. I love when something shows up in many places that someone as woo woo as Ho'oponopono is doing and saying the same thing as the Navy
Navy
SEALs
SEALs.
who are taking bullets at them. That's usually a sign that there's something there and it works pretty well. And even if you don't believe those two, try it out for 5 minutes, and feeling is believing, as Wim Hof would say, because it really does work.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and not there's no one recipe for everybody. There never has been, there never will be. The same nutrition plan will not work for everybody. The same fitness regimen at the gym will not work for everybody. The same food or supplement, so we're all so different, going right back to where we started, and that is we are all just so different. It's a beautiful, diverse world we live in that is just full of mystery and wonder and curiosity. And when we develop that viewpoint about our neighbors, our friends, the rest of the world, all of life, all sentient life is beautiful. All life is sacred. Um, and when we can restore ourselves to that our life is sacred and it becomes more sacred with attention and intention, we now develop that real peace and love for others. And that's what the world needs now.
Absolutely. And then it's way easier for others to find as they see it in you. And then they find it themselves. And it just starts this reaction and it moves so quickly. If we think a virus can spread quick,
Yeah.
man, I know it's cheesy, but you think a virus can spread quick. The idea of compassion, kindness, that spreading.
Because that's our natural state. We are meant to be, we're meant to be in community, in collusion, collaboration, all of those beautiful words that means we are all one because we are, and we are connected to one another. We live so much of life, the understanding of life is that we're in this materialistic reductionist idea, and that is everything is in a separate compartment and it all works together like a machine, and you can take a part out and put another one in and it's supposed to work. Well, try taking a dog apart and putting it back together. That's not how things work. I mean, we're all meant to be together, and that's the influence that I was talking about in the very beginning. Is it's not control of the outside, it's influence from the inside, and then other things around you react differently. What you see changes. When
Yeah.
you want your life to change, you've got to change your life.
Yeah, it's almost like literally creating the environment. When you yourself are in that compassionate state, you are creating the environment which allows the change to take place. And then others have the excuse to kind of follow in suit too.
And they can or they don't have to, and it doesn't matter. We're not
Not when
part.
you're in that compassionate state. Exactly.
Yeah. And we
Yeah,
can see their inner soul and their child, and the fact that we're all the same. We are all the same inside, just doing the
absolutely.
best we can. Yeah. So, you know what? This has been an awesome time with you, Scott. Thank you for your great wisdom and your understanding, especially for a kid who's 25 years old. Holy shit, is all I can say. Thanks for your time today. Let's talk about another topic that we can develop for next month on Wunder wisdom. Thank you if you've joined us, especially if you've listened to the end. And of course, if you have any comments ever, questions, concerns, challenges, observations about anything that Scott and I have talked about, please feel free to email me at CHRIS at powerwithin.ca. You can look at my website, powerwithin.ca, see the work that I do. And of course, Scott is then available through me. Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate your time and your interest. And this is how we create a better world. Right, Scott?
Absolutely.
See everyone next time.